what I really knew when I grew up was that I was surrounded by people who were reading and talking about books. And that was the first influence, I think, because it made me go to books. There were books all around, and my mother was particularly good at making sure her daughters were well stocked with a good library and taking us off to the British Council Library in Karachi. And so I just grew up loving books. It's a solitary activity, reading. And so there's a strange mix between it being very helpful to have people around you who are also suggesting books to you and giving books to you. But at the end of the day, what matters is, do you want to read? Do you want to be engaged in this world of literature? And if so, how do you do it? When you're very young, of course, I mean, if you're 7 or 8, then you are largely bound by what your parents are giving you access to. But past that point, I think one of the conversations around things like e-books that aren't happening and should be is actually how wonderful these are for people in parts of the world where maybe it's not that easy to get hold of actual physical books. But now you can be in most parts of the world. You can go online. You can find people talking about the kinds of books you're interested in. You can get those books. You can download them. So even if you're in places where perhaps there isn't that much available in terms of bookshops and conversations around literature, you can now find this out in the virtual world. And I think that's a really extraordinary and amazing thing that's happening in the world right now. But, you know, love will out, right? If you have that love for reading, I do genuinely believe that people know it when they have it in them. And it doesn't much matter, or it shouldn't much matter, if the people directly around you are engaged in that. You know you're doing something which millions of other people in the world are doing, and it gives you joy and pleasure. Go and do it. The label political writer is an interesting one. It's certainly not one I shy away from. As far as I'm concerned, I've always thought of myself as that way, although, you know, a lot of people started using that phrase about my writing only latterly when I started writing about politics involving countries other than Pakistan, or when the rest of the world became more interested in Pakistan's politics, I suppose. But to me, if I was thinking about writing a book which is set in Karachi, the first question is, right, when is this happening? And depending on what year it was, I knew that because politics is so much a part of people's lives, one of the first things that I was unconsciously thinking was, what is happening politically? What are the conversations people are having? How is the politics affecting people's daily lives? And so politics just got sort of woven into the books. But I've also found that that for me, writing fiction helps me clarify my own thoughts on things. I mean, there are some people who say, well, you know, what are you trying to tell other people? Well, I'm not trying to tell other people anything. I'm just trying to understand certain things that are happening in the world. And writing about them in fiction, for me, is the easiest way to do this. To see narrative not in a snapshot of yesterday's news headlines, but to tell a story that goes over a space of time, that has links to other stories, that has different points of views within it. To me, this is the only way that you can, or that I can, really understand a political moment. I think ambition is a crucial aspect of writing, but I think what that ambition is will always change for a writer. So when I was writing my first novel, In the City by the Sea, which is set over a six-week period in one city, seen through the eyes of an 11-year-old boy, the ambition with that was to write a novel that works as a novel, to make the form work. And, you know, sort of really concentrating on getting that done. With Burnt Shadows, which is the fifth novel, the ambition was a very different one, which was to write about places I didn't know, where I'd never been. The book starts in Nagasaki in 1945. I've never been to either 1945 or Nagasaki. And it was to write about these different places, but somehow have it be one narrative, these different places and times, all set within a novel. So the ambition keeps changing, and I think as a writer, the crucial thing is to know that boundary between being ambitious and, the boundary between being ambitious and being, I suppose, slightly ridiculous. But I would err on the side of the slightly ridiculous, I think. When I'm teaching writing, which I used to do, I always told my students, if you sit down to write something and you know what you're going to write and you know you can do it, don't bother. Because I think really if you're serious about writing, if it's not just there's this one story I want to tell, but rather if there's I want to write, I want to be a writer, then every piece of writing has to push you a little further. It has to stretch a muscle that hasn't been stretched before. But you can't stretch 50 muscles at the same time. Maybe 5, maybe 10, but not 50. So it is that decision that has to be made of what's hubris in a way. At what point do I start thinking I can do everything the first time round? Well, you don't have to. You have to remember that as a writer, you can always think, there's the next novel, and there's the next novel. Let me work on this right now, and then the next book we'll do something else. I think that's an important thing to remember. But that doesn't mean being conservative and playing it safe. You must always take risks. I find that it's useful to have a couple of people with whom I sort of talk in general terms. And actually, in my case, it's a friend of mine who is also a writer. I think that helps, where at sort of early stages I might say, I'm sort of thinking along these ideas, and because he's read everything, he'll say, that's interesting, have you read X book or Y book? And so it's useful sometimes if you're working around the subject matter and you know someone who's connected to it, to go to them, not to say, what should I be doing with plot and character, but sort of to say, do you know of any books around this? Writers who've done the same thing, or books of nonfiction around the subject. And in the early stages, that's what's most helpful. Once I start writing, I tend not to show anything until I've got a substantial part of a first draft done, or indeed a complete first draft. I'm actually, with the work I'm writing at the moment, I'm going to wait till there's a complete first draft, and then there are about 3 or 4 people who see it. One is my agent, and then 2 or 3 friends who are also writers, who've also read work of mine in the past and are very useful in terms of being able to give me useful commentary on it. But on the whole, with most people, I like to wait till the book is finished, till it's in it's the best shape it can be in, before I'd want most people to look at it. I wonder if I can think of a most useful piece of advice about fiction. There are certain things, usually the most useful is very targeted to a specific book. So I might say, well, with that book, this person said this very useful thing. But I'll tell you one thing which has been useful to me, which actually was first said not about fiction, but about a different kind of writing, was when I was at university. I once wrote a paper, and it was an early draft of a paper. And I showed it to the professor who was teaching the class. And he said, you write very well. There's a very nice flow to the sentences. And sometimes they flow so nicely one into another that it makes you think, oh, yes, it's all connected, but really it's not. And actually that's been useful for me, because I think sometimes it's very easy to be lazy in a certain way. And to say, well, here it's all flowing along and people will read these sentences because they're nice enough sentences, without being really rigorous and saying, is every sentence doing the absolute maximum work it should be doing? Are these sentences in here just because they're burbling along prettily, or do they really serve a function? Do they really serve the whole? Do they connect to each other? And that's what is most useful to me, is to really make sure that every sentence is doing something essential. I think if you're going to go away and read something right now, it should be, wait for it, War and Peace. And the reason for that is that I really think books are getting far too large and bloated now. There are all these books which are 600, 700, 800 pages, and there's absolutely no need for it. And you read War and Peace and you think, right, this is a book that needed to be the length it was. It deserved its 1,000 pages. And it does its 1,000 pages without ever becoming bloated. It does 1,000 pages, and every page is essential. And it's moving it along. And you don't feel that the writer is just not being edited. And if you're going to write a big book, then your readers have to feel it had to be this big book. And most big books really don't. What book would I never lend in case for fear I wouldn't get it back? Well, actually, the workaround of this is to buy multiple copies of the books you love. So Michael Ondaatje's In the Skin of a Lion, I have 3 copies of. I have one in Karachi, so when I'm there, I can read it there. And I have 2 in London. But even as I say this, I realize I would never lend them, not for fear of not getting them back, but because I wouldn't actually want them to leave my house. So yes, if there's a book you really love and you think someone else should read it, buy them a copy.